Good evening to all of you who have joined us for Dr. Alok Pandey's talk, and a very warm welcome to Dr. Pandey, currently associated with the Sri Aurobindo International Institute of Integral Health and Research at Pondicherry. Dr. Alok Pandey needs no introduction. He walks the path of an integral life and is there for the other seekers in search of the sunlit path. It is always a great honor and privilege to hear Dr. Pandey share his insights. Today's talk would be followed by a question answer session. Kindly use the chat feature to post your questions. Dr. Jayanti Banerjee would coordinate that part of the session. The topic for today is an aimless life is a miserable life. How to find, formulate, and incorporate an aim in one's life. Over to you, Dr. Pandey.
Namaste, and thank you for the kind words. I wish, we are all sincere enough to walk the integral path. It's a wonderful journey, challenging journey, and it engages us 24/7 all through life. That's the beautiful part of it. Now, coming to the subject today, we just first lay the broad foundation. When we speak about aim, we need to look upon it in 4 or 5 ways. The first thing is that aim is not something which is just as a child we get an aim and we just discover it. Aim is something which is progresses and evolves as we progress and evolve. So this evolutionary nature of aim is the first thing important to understand. Very often, I have seen people when a child asks, "What is the aim of life?" So, we have read the mother and we say that it's to find the divine. Now, the child is at loss completely. We must understand, first of all, that even what is meant by the divine, there are people who have spent their life in pursuit of divine and yet don't know what they really mean by the word divine. Now, it's true that one can pursue the divine without having a conception of the divine, but it helps to understand what we are really meaning by the word. The second part we must understand is that there is a general progression of the aim of life. There is an aim which life itself has put before itself. Now, this aim is taking place in nature over millenniums and millenniums and trillions and billions of years, and our aim of life has to be in some way or the other aligned with this general aim, because otherwise if we try to put ourselves in cross current. Sri Aurobindo puts it very beautifully, taking a cue from Sanatan Dharma. He says, well, there is all is God. Now, an individual can say that I am God and proceed like that. But if he believes that I alone am God and everything else is not that, if he starts asserting a completely separate individuality as if nothing else existed in the universe and cuts himself off from the universal truth, then there is a problem. So there is a general progression and our aim cannot be misaligned to that, because otherwise we'll be hit by the ongoing current of life. See what happens when we swim against the currents of life. So this is the second aspect. The third aspect of the whole thing is that while we have an aim and we should be aligned to it, apart from general aim, there is something called as an individual aim. So each individual within this general aim will have his own way, own approach. So this is the third aspect which is important. I've already spoken about the principle of graduality through which the aim unfolds. So aim unfolds as we progress through life. So, and then the fourth thing which is important to understand is that each part of us has its own unique aim. This is something which we often do not understand, and people often get into a lot of difficulty because of this. Because when they talk about aim, they talk about one part of their nature. And then either they do it by suppressing other elements in nature which at some point start rebelling. and there is a chaos. Take, for instance, a person who says, my aim is, I'm putting a very mundane way, that my aim is to pursue higher studies, and he goes on. But what has the person done? He has completely energized the mind, whereas he has suppressed the energies of the heart, even maybe suppressed the energies of the vital, and not taken care of the body. So what happens, while the mind pursues knowledge, the heart is not nourished. And the person becomes more and more dry, more and more unhappy. His relationships tend to, become weak. Or if the vital has not been taken care of, it may come out and even create an asuric human being who is intellectually very sound in knowledge, but completely cold, emotionless, and with an unbridled vital. This is exactly what an asura is. And the body being weak, it tends to become more and more prone to illness. So each part in us has its own unique fulfillment, if I may say so. And these are the four axes on which we have to look upon the aim of life. So the first aspect, what is the general aim of nature? If we don't have to read a book, and we don't have to, hear anyone. We look at nature and we get all the lessons. So the general aim, if we look at nature over a long period of time. So first thing we notice is change. Second, we notice this change as a directionality, and if we may say so, a purpose. Now, the directionality gives it a purpose. So what really is the aim? If we look at billions of years, we can say that there is a change which is happening, a change of form. There is also a growth of consciousness from the worm to ape and man, and through which there is a greater and greater manifestation of certain things which are latent. Now, why we use the word latent? Because, it has a bearing on what is going to come. Now, within the fish, there is a latent mind. Within the monkey, there is a latent reason. Now, all this, in fact, evolutionary biologists will tell us that, there are three layers of brain. There is the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the human brain. So, there is a progressive manifestation. So, in nature, if we just look at nature through large spaces of time, we see two things. One is there is the form which is evolving through a period of time. And second is the consciousness, and this consciousness, what is this doing through the form? Bringing out greater and greater possibilities which were inherent within it. Now, this relation of form and consciousness is very fascinating, and it has a direct bearing on Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Let's take, for example, a child. Now, a child may be born to become a hero, a sage, a wise man, a super intelligent boy, but when he is a little baby, all that he can do is cry, or maybe laugh or smile, and because the instrument is not developed. Now, as the instrument begins to develop, we see the differentiation taking place. Beginning, all children are more or less the same in terms of their basic activities. They need food, they have this basic biological function. But as they grow up, as the instrument develop, we see that first it is the vital part with lot of energy and activity. Then as they begin to develop, there is the questioning mind which comes in, and some may even not go beyond it, but still others who are marked for something still greater will feel a spiritual urge, an angst, an existential something going on inside. So we see that as the instruments develop, the consciousness within manifests itself. So both these aspects are important to take into consideration. So the general aim is evolution in a certain way. Now when we zoom in onto human beings, in human beings, it's the teaching of the Gita, the old Sankhya doctrine, the evolution takes place along three layers. The physical man, the vital man, and the mental man. And beyond it, the spiritual man. This is the natural journey. And it's very easy. We can take the same example and understand it. Or if we take the example of the Gita, which speaks about the three gunas. So there is, the first step is when we are fully in a state of tamoguna. Now, again, we don't need to read a book or understand, but it's a state which we all can identify it when we are completely submerged in obscurity. There is not even a spark that wants to know. We encounter children grown up and talk about aim. They will say, what aim? We know what is the aim. I want to enjoy life. Now there is not a thought given. What is this state of tamoguna? It is a state when the fire of growth, the urge for progress is completely submerged as it were in a state of darkness and obscurity. There is a dullness. All that one wants to lead is a routine life which is, so-called in comfort zones. Now, this is first stage. The second is when the Rajoguna becomes prominent, and when the Rajoguna is prominent, there is a lot of activity, dynamic push. We want to achieve, we want to compete, we want to touch new heights, we are adventurers, we are, the warrior aspect develops within us, the need to go beyond our little comfort zone, to amass wealth, to have fortunes, riches, all this comes in. And then finally there is the Sattvagun, where there is a seeking. Now the moment there is a seeking for knowledge of any kind, there is the Sattvagun. Now this is how nature helps man to develop, or something within man rather. And when it reaches that door of Sattvagun and starts leading a life which is more oriented towards the right, that's the time when human beings begin to say, what is the right law of action? How should I be? What I should do in a given situation, circumstance? It's surprising that there are people who don't care about it. I mean, they just live life. Whatever impulse comes, and there's a very nice justification always that I'm flowing with nature. It's my nature. Yes, but what kind of nature? So nature itself is not one entity. Nowadays this is a modern term. Oh, we are flowing with nature. But if we go back into the ancient spiritual teaching, which is ancient and yet modern because these are truths of existence, we see that nature also is many layered. So we can swim in the lowest currents of nature. That is nature. It's somebody's nature to sit and do nothing and remain bored, or just flick on the TV channels. That's nature. But there's another nature which wants to switch off the television and says, I must go out and be in real world and conquer. That's also nature. Then there is another nature where we begin to question, seek, want to know, learn. We read, study, think, meditate, visit places, meet people, because we are athirst with the fire of knowledge. And then out of nature, there is a need in man. We are programmed to go beyond nature. That's why we see this tendency in science manifest by wanting to understand the forces of material nature to conquer it. What does a yogi want? He wants to conquer the forces of psychological nature. This is the highest kind of adventure, that I get angry but I want to master my anger. Now when these questions have begun to arise or awaken in the mind of man, then he is marked out for the real purpose for which nature is taking us. And what is it trying to do when we look at in this great space of time? Nature is progressively manifesting something within us, which is, we may use the word perfection, we may use the word divine, but it is manifesting something which is hidden within it, like a latent potentiality, a latent power. So what does yoga do? Yoga, I am just touching upon it, which is on the aside. Yoga is a means to accelerate this process. Nature takes many lifetimes. That's, by the way, is the significance of rebirth. It's for evolutionary progression. So what yoga does is say, no, why is such a long time? Because it means a lot of suffering, pain, struggle. So it accelerates the process so that we take jump time. So this is about the general progression. Now it's okay. We may say, okay, fine, we have understood that from Tamogun to Rajogun to Sattvagun. What do? I mean, do I have a role, or I just, cultivate Sattvagun in its own way randomly? So that's where we see something very interesting, that there is something called as an individual path of evolution. And the Gita puts it in this way. It speaks of the Swadharma and Swabhav. So in this individual evolution, each of us has a certain center, a special mode of being, a way of being which is uniquely our own. And one of the ways to discover it is, like I ask this question to children, okay, what is the core value? Very often we'll see in statement, what is the core value? So initially they may not understand. So sometimes we have to put it across that, okay, between, let's say, justice, love, kindness, truth, knowledge, strength, power, what do you really value most? Beauty. So then they come out with a core value. Now this core value is the Swabhava, the unique mode of being, the unique temperament, the soul type. In the deepest sense, it is the soul type. And now why this is important is because our evolution, while has to take place in certain general progression, but it has to be through the door of Swabhava. So it cannot be that, there is a person for whom the center is knowledge. Now, if a person whose center is love tries to imitate that, he will, as the Gita puts it very beautifully, Swadharmo nidhanam shreya par dharmo bhyava. So there are people I know in the ashram context who asked the mother that they said, we cannot sit and meditate. And mother said, it's not necessary for everyone to meditate. She said, for you, work is the path. Somebody has actually shown me a letter written by the mother to this person who was, a very good hockey player, and then he started teaching hockey in the ashram school. And he wrote to the mother. She said, no, it's not necessary for you. Work is enough. If you do work with the right attitude, you can progress 10 times faster than meditation. At the same time, to somebody else, Sri Aurobindo would say, doesn't matter. Let you spend time in meditation, that's your path. So it's important to see what is our swabhava. And along with the swabhava, there is swadharma, the law of action through which we will realize the aim. Aim is same, to arise out of inferior modes of nature to the more superior modes, and from the superior modes of nature to go beyond nature. This is the general. But each one has a unique key which one has to apply. Now this master key is what determines our individuality. Now, this has been falsified today, like individuality is very important. But today, what we understand by individuality is a very, ego construct, which we want to somehow assert and establish. And along the lines which, our ignorance dictate, the collective suggestion, what we often call as aim, so is nothing but a power of collective suggestion which hypnotizes us. It's like, everybody is in a rat race for money, outer success. But actually the game of life is never meant for that. It was never meant for that. If we really look at nature, the book of nature, which I call as the original Veda. So if you look at the book of nature, what is success? We have this story, and I often use this story, the hare and the tortoise story, that Aesop's fable. So, now, this story has a little bit of a problem right from childhood, I felt. Which hare, not all hares are going to sleep, to allow tortoise to take over. So the story is like, to start with, it's a non-starter. So why it's a non-starter? The tortoise did a wrong thing by saying, okay, I'll run the race with you. The tortoise would have been wiser had he told the hare, let's have the race on water. And let's see who wins. Not only water, underwater. Now, each one has his own great potential through which one has to climb. And very often when we get into this race, first of all, the game of life was never meant for this success, failure. These are all they are again means. And if we just go into those means, then we will miss out on the real aim. Aim is something which is more intrinsic. So, what we call as work that we need to do, people often mistake that, I want to choose this vocation. That's not an aim, that's a means. I want to become a doctor, that's a vocation. Why do you want to become a doctor? I want to amass a lot of wealth. Why do you want to amass a lot of wealth? Oh, then I'll be a powerful man. So look at it. Now, aim is ultimately inwardly. You want to be a powerful man and you want to earn money. For that, you want to do medicine. I don't blame them because the amount of donation that is, nowadays involved in becoming a doctor, it's astronomical. I just wonder, a person who can spend crores of rupees to get into a medical college, what is he going to do subsequently? But nevertheless, now this person, what he doesn't realize, that with all the wealth at your disposal, with all the degrees at your disposal, you will not have the authentic power. You won't have this much power even that if the electricity goes away, you can control your anger and your sweating. This famous story of Buddha and Ashoka, which, shows it so well that when, Buddha met Ashoka, as the story goes, and King Ashoka says, I am the emperor, the conqueror, and Buddha says, I am also an emperor. So he says, what have you conquered? So Buddha asks Ashoka, what have you conquered? He says, vast dominions. He says, well, I have also conquered vast dominions. What are the domains you have conquered? I have conquered land. And he says, you may conquer any amount of land, but you stand on two legs. Only that much land at a given point of time belongs to you. So Ashoka says, okay, fine, but what have you conquered? He says, I have conquered vast domains of my inner being, which belong to me, on which I stand, the true Bhumi. And I have mastered my nature. So you see, ultimately, we need to understand that aim is something intrinsic and there are many steps towards it. This is the other part that we should not, some people place before themselves an aim about which they are very vague about the steps. Now, often, I speak about the mother and Sri Aurobindo in this way, that Sri Aurobindo is like someone who takes us in one leap from Kanchenjunga to Mount K2 to Mount Everest. Finished. Triple transformation. I have seen lectures. Psychic transformation, spiritual transformation, supramental transformation. Whereas we have not even become reasonable human beings. Someone was long back asking me about, beyond man. I said, first become man. Master your animal nature. Be reasonable. Yes, that is the goal. But by reading it, you don't leap. So there are many short steps. And what the mother does, she shows us how first to arrive at Kanchenjunga, then the steps you have to take. In fact, she becomes a bridge and takes us. So what we sometimes forget is that there is a big gap between knowing things and doing them. And this is what humanity suffers from terribly. And that's why the mother repeatedly reminds us the one thing that we need. I mean, at this point of time, somebody says, one quality you need to develop, I would say sincerity. Because actually, this is what fills the hiatus between the aim and actually realizing it. We may have all the great goals. Everybody has a New Year resolution. It doesn't take 12 hours for the resolution to go away. And what is the reason? People give excuses that, we are weak, our will is weak, what to do, or justification, human nature, 100 things. But actually, if we look inside sincerity, so we have never really been one-pointed towards the aim that we have sought. So one-pointed means to bring all our energies and align them towards it. One-pointed is not sitting and closing the eyes. Now, let's say, for instance, somebody has the divine for a name. So in everything, I must look for divinity. It means that in human beings to start with, of course, there's the most challenging to find divinity in human beings. So we can start with plants, easier to find divinity in plants. So, then animals, easier to find. Even in tiger, ferocious, still, there is a divinity. Even in snake, if you observe from a distance, a cobra going swiftly on the road, there is a grace in the movement. But human beings is difficult to find because the person may be smiling and yet harboring a dagger under the sleeve. But still, there too, to see divinity in all events, circumstances, somebody who is seeking the divine would equally in death and life, in the tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, everywhere will say that here is divinity in its grandiose music. When there is a tsunami, he'll say Mahakali Kali is trampling, dancing over nature and feel the delight. Equally, he will say an ant making an ant hill and say, what a divinity. Look at this, divinity unfolding in a little creature. So, when we use the word concentration and ingathering of energies on the aim, it is not like we separate aim from life, at least not the way of integral life. It means now that becomes our preoccupation in all that we do. Whether it be eating, whether it be, going for a swim, whether it be, playing games, exercise, rest, in all activities. So when we do exercise, we are not just doing so that we look good, bodybuilders, but we are doing to make the body more conscious. When we read, it's to make the mind more supple. So this is the other part, that we do everything so that we discover the divine through that activity, in that activity, and manifest him better and better. So there are people who develop the consciousness quite well, but they do not focus on the instruments. So the mother speaks about developing the instrument. Because if the consciousness is developed, the instruments are not adapted. For instance, he says, mind must enter into wideness. Now we lose so many opportunities to be wide. As Sri Aurobindo says, oh eager disputant, when thou hast won in a debate, you have lost an opportunity. But we teach, how to win in a debate. Pros and cons, but there is something still higher. Synthesize, both are right. That Alice in Wonderland, who has won the race? Well, all have won the race. So there is a way that the mind can create a thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis where it understands that, well, there are different standpoints which are different ways of looking at it, and there is a higher standpoint in which all these different ways are synthesized together. So mind becomes wide, it becomes supple, it can learn to concentrate. The mind should develop to such an extent that even in a crowd you can be alone and concentrate. Nothing disturbs. Even on a battlefield, mother speaks of this. She says, My child, you can concentrate even in a battlefield. Even all the noise is going on, but the mind is able to gather all the energies and focus it. Now, all this is in real time. So, yoga is done in real time, in real life practice. You are with people whom you may not like, affinities. Master the affinities and try to, still harbor love. So these are this about the mind. Then she speaks about love. Now, this is another instrumental part of our nature. Love is so important in creation. It's the savior of creation. It's, to an eye that can see, it will see love everywhere, from stones right up to the supreme divine. And yet, the most neglected part. I mean, we know how to gather knowledge. Google search is there for everything except how to love. I mean, you will have all the nice theories, but you have to practice it. So, this aspect that we develop the instrumental part of our nature, the mind, the emotions, it's an instrumental part of nature. They can help us find the greatest mysteries of existence and delight directly. Emotions have a direct, outreach. But equally, if emotions are left untrained, they can be so turbulent and lead to a total chaos in life. Passions are like fire. Tame it, and it can, fuel it with the best kind of fuel, and see it will make the journey of ascension so wonderful. A person who doesn't have enough passion in anything cannot really achieve whatever aim he may put forward. So one must discover. That's why they said, discover your passion. Passion is so important. And then, of course, the body, if the body is sickly, tired, this is a completely neglected area. So, development of the instrumental being is also necessary if we want to fulfill and realize the aim. And then, finally, the fourth aspect is that aim is we are not disembodied beings, we are an integral being. So, we are not just mind-centric, that too not mind-centric, the left brain-centric civilization, where we develop our analytical, rational faculties. Very good, it's important. What about the intuitive, holistic faculties? They remain asleep. In children it is there, but they lose it as they grow up. So there are different aspects of consciousness, different aspects of our nature, and all of them must arrive at their fullness. So, what is that fullness? The term used is perfection. Now, perfection is, we can understand in one way that for each level there is a perfection. So, perfection at the animal level, at the level of the tiger is, we know what perfection at the level of the tiger is. If a tiger can't pray and if a deer can't run, it's a, lame deer and an incompetent tiger. So, what is perfection at the human level? The beauty is at human level, there is not one perfection, but to keep on adding greater and greater possibilities and dimensions. Human beings are, as a born, programmed. Our software is programmed to transcend ourselves and bring in new possibilities and then integrate it with the rest of the nature. So perfection implies an overall, all-round development by its very nature and all-round harmonious development. So reason and faith must be harmonized. The will for justice and the need for kindness, they must be harmonized. You can't just, I am justice oriented, so I become cold judge, but have no kindness. Equally, kindness should not be at the, it may be kindness to let a criminal go free, but it becomes the cause of much chaos and disorder in the world. So we have to deliberately harmonize all that seems to be the opposites, and in a state of perfection towards which we climb, all these seeming opposites can be beautifully harmonized and brought together in a harmonious whole. So these are just some of the thoughts. So one is the general aim, then the individual door. Each one of us has a door, what was called in ancient times as the fourfold way of being, the four soul types. If I'm engaged with physical matter, if it interests me, well, that's my road to perfection. The person who creates beautiful things through matter does a great service to the world. It's as much a creation as a beautiful poetry. So very often we miss out. So it's his door of perfection. To a person who is engaged in creating wealth and opportunities and bringing out beautiful products out of that. He is also engaged in another kind of perfection, and that is his unique door. And there is other one, a third one, type of humanity for whom strength, power, justice, righteousness, the arm of the hero, that is the heroic mold of temperament. If you put a heroic mold of person into business, now people often talk about vocation. Now, born leaders are leaders. Let him go on the battlefield. Let him lead a group in anything. Then he will bring out his best. So it's important from the from the totality and the society point of view, from the collective point of view, that each one brings his best into this world, which is what sometimes is missing because of this, common social pressure. So each one must now, today I was so happy to see this news that now two of the girls have, joined Navy and they're going to fly the aircraft. And I was so happy that one of them is going to fly the Rafale. This is it. But if we look at society 50 years back, what was the paradigm? Ladki, acha, she must learn ghar ka kaam kaj. She has to only learn to cook, look after the home, get married, have children. And women accepted it as the valid aim. They even felt that if we do something else, we'll be breaking the social order. But we must understand that the age of society dictating our aims is gone. Now is the age when the individual is coming out and he wants or she wants to have her own aims. So we have to assist in discovering it. What is that unique door? If there is an adventurer girl, she must find that mold, that type. If somebody is interested in music and dance, she finds that mold. Somebody is interested in seeking after knowledge, that mold. So this is how each one has his unique door, unique expression, which one has to discover by discovering taste, tendencies, interests, temperament. And one can, see from childhood. Unfortunately, the file gets corrupted by the Trojan horse at home, sorry to say that, and then all the mahalla, and of course, society, hopefully, also the school should not add to it. Ultimately, human beings forget who they are, they become 99% and 95%, which is really very absurd because it doesn't help even in knowledge. So, anyways, so there is an individual aspect of perfection, then there is consciousness is the instrument, both we must see. And finally, we must know that for each part, for total development, there should be mind which is lit up with knowledge, each corner of the mind. And this is not just one kind of knowledge. Knowledge is not that I am a good doctor, I have done my MD, DM, and I can rattle out all that I have read in books. That is not knowledge. That is memorizing things and, information. The mind of knowledge can cast its gaze anywhere and discover knowledge. All those who are really, look at some of these people, I just wonder, how knowledge is a power. It works in every dimension of aspect of existence. Knowledge is there in every aspect of existence. And then, of course, love. And then, of course, power and will, which is a whole journey in itself. The need for power is there in human beings, but now we talk about not only hard power, but soft power. There is an inner power through which we can achieve things in a much better way. There is the highest of power which clothes itself in humility and compassion and yet is nevertheless tremendous in its impact upon the world. And of course, there is the sense of beauty. So two things in the end I must emphasize upon with which we can close and take in questions. So one is what is missing very much, as I said, is this aspect of love and beauty. And another thing is we mistake completely the true ananda, which is the essence of existence, with superficial joys and pleasures. We say, my aim is to be happy. Happiness cannot be an aim. Happiness comes when we put in effort and progress. Otherwise, if we put happiness as an aim, then after some time we get bored. So people who are, people have lots of money, then they don't know what to do with it. They feel they are happy. So they start running from one place to another to, buy happiness. We are seeing all this drug cartel and all these exposes coming up. It's very strange. But not so strange if you look at it like this, that what was missing in the life of those who had so much money, success, name it, and they have it. What is missing? They are not happy. Why they are not happy? Because then only you take to such things. Because they are not really listening and following what their inner self wants them to be. Whereas there are actors who follow that lead and they are excellent. But there are many who have gone into it just because of the glamour, the success, the outer thing which it brings. But it cannot give happiness because we are disconnected with ourselves. And the energy of love which is missing, because of which one runs here and there in search with a begging bowl of love, for love. So these are the two aspects which we must remember. And lastly, one thing which is never trained, and I myself know that it took time to train that aspect, is will. It's very unfortunate. Will is the switch. Will and faith are the two master switches in a human being. Gita goes on to say faith is the man. And this faith has nothing to do with beliefs, non-beliefs, religion, nothing at all. It is my faith which is the will to be. Whatever is my faith, that becomes my will to be. Now this faith and will are completely neglected and left untrained. So we have highly intelligent 99% percentile or 99.99, who knows, Harvard educated and crooks and criminals sitting in seats of power. This is what is a full-blown asura. And worse for it because he's too intelligent and too cunning and too deceptive. Because inside there was not even this much will to master the impulse towards, ruining society, to master even a thing like selfishness. These are small things which we need to understand. So this is the overall, just a very general picture. In Indian thought, they had a fourfold progression. Let me just to make a closing comment. So they spoke of the fourfold aim at each stage. So in the youngster, in school, it was dharma, which had nothing to do with outer discipline. But dharma was the right law of everything. You want to enjoy? This is the right way to enjoy. See, it's so interesting. You want to develop a healthy body, this is the right way to develop. So this dharma, which is the true law of everything, that basis was laid. And then the second aim was the go out into the world, wrestle with its forces, win the victories, succeed if you wish, whatever. It's grahast, when you grapple with the forces of life. And then when you have the necessary experience, then comes the final aims of earth, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So you ultimately prepare yourself for the final moksha. Now this moksha has nothing to do with otherworldliness, but freedom from ignorance. But I believe that now there is a jump time and evolutionary process has hastened. So first two aims or the middle two aims are really, it's not necessary. Even dharma is now changed because of the mode of evolution. So right now, human beings, their primary need, the primary drive is freedom from ignorance. That's why knowledge of all kinds, it is the age when knowledge is going to take precedence over everything else. But not just a book knowledge, but a true knowledge which is born out of wisdom, love, and strength of will and character. So with this I would close. Thank you so much. If there are questions, I'll be very happy to take.
Thank you so much, Bhai. We were all mesmerized listening to you and taking down points. It was like as if, it was a journey. I think first we need to take the journey and then we can take it to our children. So we have a few questions here. Thank you so much. So the first question is that what is the largest obstacle to achieving the consciousness of the mind? To have harmony in all aspects, what can be done in day-to-day life?
Okay. So we'll split them into two parts. The first is about the consciousness of the mind. So the largest obstacle is narrowness and rigidity. So a mind which is too self-satisfied. You see, one of the big problems is, as I often say, that ignorance is not a problem. Arrogance is. So a mind which does not have the humility. I mean, if I have read the life of these great thinkers, scientists at a point of time, and I feel children should read it. What a tremendous humility. Even after they have, discovered so much and achieved so much, look at, somebody like Newton and Einstein, they have the sense of the mystic. So, one of the big problem with the mind is that the more it begins to know, it begins to lose the wonder of the child. Whereas we must keep that child in us alive, which wants to know. So the biggest problem of mind is to be self-satisfied with intellectual knowledge. And especially when it thinks, all that I know there is a limerick to it. That I am Mr. So-and-so, a graduate from Balliol College. All that is knowledge, I know it. All that I do not know is not knowledge. Now, when we adopt that attitude, then it is dangerous. So, fundamental obstacle to all knowledge is lack of humility, the intellectual arrogance that comes. Even this idea that knowledge can come only in this way. Only by applying your analysis and, reason onto sense observation, you can arrive at knowledge. This is a big blunder. I don't want to go into its detail, but I am saying with all responsibility as a scientist that it's a big blunder. But this is one of the means. It will tell you the processes subtly. But knowledge, first of all, the definition of knowledge in India, we have very interesting concept about. The term is Vidya. So Vidya and Avidya are not defined by the degree. Vidya is oneness. In knowledge, which Vidya is that which liberates us from the sense of division. Right now, we still have avidya. We know all about a plant life. We know all about human life. Now, next we must know the interconnectedness of the creation. Now, this interconnectedness, we must go still deeper. The oneness of creation. So, we are still in avidya, though we call it knowledge. So, when ignorance passes off as knowledge, it's dangerous. So this is about the mind. So mind must always understand that whatever it knows is nothing compared to what needs to be known. And then from knowledge is not just intellectual knowledge, but it must leap up to sight and experience that comes by direct identification. So we must understand this is the second aspect. Third, knowledge is incomplete unless it's all-encompassing and integral. Knowledge in one sphere may be very good, specialization. But knowledge must be in every aspect of life. True knowledge. Again, I have qualified it as Vidya, which is the knowledge based on the one and oneness. So, the Vedantic way of knowledge was from above downwards. Very often people say, oh, what is the Ashwat tree? Ashwat tree is a top-down view of life. We want to put it scientifically. We have a bottom-up view of life. From the surface, we deduce the soul, try to infer. Or from the mud, we try to understand the sun with all our muddy eyes. But the way of yoga is discover the sun, illumine the sight, then look at things because you'll be better off. Discover your own depths, find the psychic being, the soul within, then look at the surfaces of life and you will get a sense and meaning and purpose. So this is the big obstacle that, mind's limitation. And what was the second question? Harmony. How to express harmony. One word answer is to discover the one. There is no other basis on which harmony can be created. All other bases we can have adjustment, acceptance. This is what we often do. Oh, let's have a harmony. So how do we like to? It's okay, you pactize with what is false, untrue, even something contradicts your own deeper self. But we say it's okay, for the sake of harmony, I'm doing it. So for the sake of harmony, let China come and, take over. Because we must have harmony with our neighbors. Harmony is one with truth. And truth is based on the bedrock of one. So harmony can only come when we step out of division and enter into one. Meaning thereby, we should know two things if we want to harmonize. First, discover the one. Doesn't matter, call it divine, God, whatever it, truth, perfection, no name, nothingness, everythingness, it's not important. But one, discover that ultimate reality. This is the basis because it's common in everything. Let's say, a simple example, human beings can't harmonize with each other. Even two people in a room, forget about religious harmony and interfaith. Put two human beings together, look at what is going to happen after a few days. So, when, Mother was asked, how can humanity become one? She said, by becoming conscious of its origin. So for harmony, we must discover the original principle. We are all divine in a sense. This is the first thing to know. But equally, we must know that there are differences in manifestation, which is what we are speaking about. So though each one is one, in nature we see that all trees are trees, but each tree is different. In one tree, different branches of the same tree are different. In one branch, on one branch, different leaves are different. And in a small little twig, different leaves are each unique. So we must understand that on the basis of the one, there is the play of variation. Like in music, we have the alap going on, some, and on that. So one and the many simultaneously, to know that there is the one consciousness behind everything. That we must at least understand and conceive. Go towards experience. But to start with, that then, the hate, all that must go away. We have differences. There will be differences. So what do we do when we have differences? I must follow my own inner truth. Will it hurt someone? Maybe it may. But I am not doing with the consciousness of hurting the person. See the difference there is. But sometimes what people do, they don't follow their own inner truth. They get stifled. They feel existential angst. I see as a psychiatrist people who suffer. Why? Because they have never allowed their own inner truth to come out. And often they say, we want harmony. It never comes like that. You will see that there will be another cause for complaining. So harmony comes when we don't hate or get. In fact, if you follow your own deeper truth, you will never have anger against anyone. You will feel, in fact, sympathy and compassion that, they're not understanding that, I have to follow my own inner truth. But if you stifle it, then the result is anger. On one side, you have never lived your own true life. Now, again, I am qualifying true life. That's a qualifier. But at the same time, chronic irritation. Sometimes we say, because of you. Sometimes we don't say, I sacrifice this, that. So this is the second aspect. Third is we must understand that by sacrifice, we grow into greater and greater. Means we, in any tendency, anything we want to do. So there is a lower kind of harmony, which comes by pactizing with all that is low and ugly in nature. And there is a higher harmony which comes by sacrificing the lower for the sake of the higher. And sometimes it can go through a very terrible passage like the Mahabharata. There was a kind of workable harmony. And Shri Krishna broke that harmony. Why? Because he wanted a higher harmony based on dharma. So, harmony is not about adjustment and adaptation. It may go through a difficult passage, but yet it must tend towards truth, sacrifice. And fourth, the most important, something which I often say is missing in this civilization, and we are suffering from that, is love. Harmony cannot be had by the mind. Mind divides. Love unites. See, now people are talking about this issue of language, and there is all kinds of division. So sometimes I turn back and ask, two people who speak the same language, doesn't matter, it may be Tamil, English, Sanskrit, Odia, whatever, they never fight. They kill each other. Sometimes people ask me, said, oh, have you learned Tamil? I have gone to every state of India. So, of course, 6 years in Pune, FMC, MBBS and MD. And then, of course, here. So I said, see, I want to learn one language. What is the language? Language of the heart. It never fails you. It never deceives you. Instantly you click. You don't need, this mental ways are extremely divisive. Oh, this is my. Why? Because he speaks my language. This is how mind puts in slots. How can this language, create harmony with another? This is superior, that is superior. Ask anybody all over the world. They say my language is superior. Now, but language of the heart, the dumb knowledge of, even if you try to harmonize based on language and mind, you can at most harmonize speaking creatures called humans. Whatever we speak. What about animals? They can't speak. They can only take out sounds. How do we harmonize with them? What about plants? What about matter? What about earth? We have ruined it. Why? Because we don't have love. If we had love, and love is directly opposed to selfishness. So unselfishness, selflessness is the way towards harmony. But unselfishness does not mean that I put myself at the mercy of all the others and all the world forces play a football over me. It doesn't mean that. It means that whatever work I do, that's what the mother says in the beginning. Your aim must be high and wide, generous and disinterested. That is unselfishness. I'm not doing it ki mera kya fayda hoga. It's not for my own benefit. I'm doing it because one loves creation. One loves because when any action, the difference between an action which is done for a certain reward of, outer reward, and when it is an act of love, is the difference between the food we have in a 5-star, 7-star hotel and cooked by mom. No food can compare it. Why? Because there is love. You can't manufacture love. You can't pay for love. So this is, I think, these are the 4 things to create harmony. Yes. Anything else?
Thank you so much. I think the act of love, as you said, Shabri, when we remember Shabri ke Ber,
Yes,
yes. The love which all those beautiful Vyanjan which is given in a palace was definitely, her Ber was more tastier to Sri Ram than anything else.
Yes. There is the famous bhajan of Surdas. Saag vidur Duryodhan ke meva tyage, saag vidur gar khayo. So it is true that when there is something, love is there, it's very much missing in today's civilization.
I think all these stories and all our epics, they have something which is very relatable to our day-to-day life.
Yes.
We have another very nice question from Shalini, and she wants to ask that we all have our aims which can fulfill or change after some time, but our life's aim is different from them. How can we differentiate both?
So life's aim is something which is deep within. One has to study oneself. There is no shortcut. In any case, in a general way, when we are pursuing something, whatever different aims which we are probably, we won't use the word aim, we'll prefer to use the word, as I said, goals. So what we should understand is that whatever goal we have chosen in life, doesn't matter. Let's say a job one has picked up and thinks it's an aim. Start with, there's no point philosophizing. But it's important that we must want to progress. This urge for progress should be there in any field. And if we have it relentlessly, we will touch that point where the outer begins to enter into the inner. Any field. See the great scientists, material scientists. They become so mystic after a point of time because they discover it. So, whatever field we have chosen, field of work, which is different from aim, but nevertheless, even if we mix up the two, go to its extreme possibility and discover what is inside it. And we will discover because whether it's inward or outward, everywhere we'll touch the same one. So, keep progressing. The answer is that we should progress in whatever field we have picked up. Doesn't matter. And when we keep progressing, it will lead us to that point where automatically, and as I said, that whatever work we do, we should be unselfish. This is the, a minimum requirement of life. If we are selfish, then we cannot discover our inner aim because ego is a veil. It won't allow us. Even if we discover an aim, we will start looking at it like, mera kya fayda hoga? There were people who would come to Divine and say, tell me what you are going to give me. Divine, like that Gitanjali story, no? He will say, first you tell me what you are going to give me. So people walk away. ये कौन सा भगवान है? हमको तो देने वाला चाहिए. But when we give, that's what it transmutes and gives it back. See, this is the principle of sacrifice is this. It's the exchange offer. So, to learn to be unselfish, to learn to give, be generous, that not just for myself am I living. Whatever field I may be doing, it's not just for my satisfaction, my little family, my children. I mean, even animals do it. What's the difference between then us and animals? Even animals do it for their little babies, for their little den, shelter. Human beings should be at least one step better. As they say, love the neighbors at least to start with. if not the whole world. So, progress, unselfishness are the doors through which we will end up entering into that true aim. Yeah.
So we have all teachers here. So a question from the primary section also, which is very beautiful, is that what all can we do to give children a platform to gain and absorb knowledge and not merely gather information?
Yes, excellent. Yes. So, knowledge is something which has to be evoked and induced. See, this is how it was always earlier. So, people, this idea that somebody will, give knowledge is a dated thing. It's becoming redundant now. So, we should deal with children, ask them. Their mind should be consulted. And they will come up with fascinating things. They will come with their own unique ways of looking at things. Even at a leaf, even material knowledge. It's okay. It will also indicate the different kinds of soul types, possibilities. But unfortunately, this idea of giving knowledge from outside has come because we want a standardized perfection, which is the result of reason intervening. Everything must be cut to size. When during the Beatles' time this song came up, we want no education, standard products. So this idea of standardizing, see, I give this example. Look at the moon. Now ask a child, what is it? Now, there will be different answers. Somebody will say, oh, it's the glory of the Shiva's head. Somebody will say it's a hard, dry rock. Somebody will say it's a upagraha of the earth. Somebody will say, oh, it is so charming and romantically beautiful. It's okay. There are different ways of looking at the moon, and each of them completes, each of them gives some idea about the moon. So it's a totality, and each one has its unique door. But what we do is we suppress all other things and insist on this idea that moon is a cold rock, it's an artificial satellite of earth. Now this is very incorrect, wrong way, because we are actually conditioning the mind instead of liberating it. Knowledge should liberate, whereas it becomes conditioning. So when the child grows up, he loses the charm of the moon, he loses poetry, and he loses the romantic side of life. For him, moon is simply, I remember as a child, we used to have the Sharad Purnima. So there was kheer which was prepared and kept under the moon. Now, we used to enjoy the kheer. Oh, bahut acha hota hai, whatever be the thing. Then later on, it's all superstition, doesn't matter what way. But see, it's not about whether this is good or bad. Look at a process. It made it something so beautiful. To me, now when I look at it, it's like you're connecting with the whole cosmos. We don't know what is coming from the moon. We have no clue. No scientist can say that there is nothing which is happening. All that we say, we don't know. Maybe, after all, the full moon has an effect in some way or the other. We don't know what happens, what energies come. But the whole thing becomes so charming. Now that charming side we have lost. That wonder we have lost. As the great poet says, we have lost, forgotten to stand and stare. Everything is standardized. Pick up a book on moon, it will talk everything except Chandrasekharai. So consult, allow the child to come out with knowledge, induce it. Then we may put a little corrective here or there, but the problem with that, it requires much less children per teacher. Because then, you can, each child is unique, you can deal with it. This is the biggest problem. I don't know how it will be tackled. Maybe through, ultimately, digital education, where you have a set of children who are interested in pursuing a certain kind of path. But that's still in the future.
Yes. Being a facilitator to the children's knowledge is something that, as you said, we have another question is, how do we open ourselves to divine love?
Oh, wonderful. I love the question. How do we open ourselves to the divine love? Okay. First of all, love will open. Love has the key to the door of divine love. So all of us are given certain keys inside. We are given will, we are given knowledge, and we are given emotions. So the first thing is, any aspect, let's say knowledge, I spoke about, keep on by the power of sacrifice, refine knowledge from the crude to subtle, from gross to subtle, till we reach that one. That's the path of knowledge. So what about love? Initially, love is like, it's a raw material mixed with hate and jealousy and possessiveness and all kinds of things. Extract it. That's the process. Make it selfless, make it more and more beautiful, refined, not the crude, vulgar love where I want, but something more refined, where love becomes its original root of love is to give. So at least to learn to give. Then initially one gives because one is wants something in return. So there are steps. One is I love myself. I don't care about others. And people call it, if those who care about others, they say, you are too sensitive. You must become a little hard-skinned. Means you must retrogress. Okay, please don't do that. Yeah. Anyways, so I don't want to use terms. So first, let us, we love ourselves and ourselves and ourselves. Next step is we love others if they love us. So those who scratch my back, I scratch them. Oh, they are wonderful people. Somebody who tells me that, you may be wrong, mistaken. Oh, this fellow, what does he know about me? So we love when we are loved and we give in return. Third step is when we love and we want to receive love. We love, but beyond a point it gets exhausted because we are not receiving much. Fourth is when we love, we don't want any return, but we want it to be acknowledged. That's already high. Moms can love like that. That, at least the child should say once in a while, Mom, you made a very good pudding. That's all. Enough for moms too. Din ban gaya. Aur kuch nahi. Itna. That's all. Moms may have given their life, but that particular day when she has made a pudding, if the child says, Mom, this was fantastic, that's enough. So acknowledgement. And then, but they have to transcend even that. When you love because you can't do otherwise. You embody that power of love. Now, this is the normal path, but there is a shortcut. And the shortcut is we become what we truly love. So, when we love the divine, we automatically begin to develop all the power of divine love the way divine loves everyone. So, that's why there is a long process which I have just described, and the shorter process is love the divine in any form, name. Love him truly, true bhakti, not loving what will I get from this divine. Nothing. Just love and give oneself. Then a time will come by the power of giving, our nature will become molded according to the divine nature. That's why it's so important, Of course, we can love anyone, and if we do it without expectation, we'll touch the principle of divine love. Even one can, like Mandodari is a sati. Even though, she loved an asura. She's an asur kanya and an asur wife. But still by the power of love. Tulsi loved, Sankhachud. And yet, by the power of love, she could realize it. When we love unselfishly, selflessly, without expectation, in anything, we can pick up a stone and discover the divine. But another approach is when we just love the divine in whatever way, whatever name, form, then very soon, very rapidly, by the contact with the divine consciousness, we begin to be molded in the image and possibilities of divine love. So we can, and they are not either or, we can, pick up both. So shortcut is bhakti, and the long cut is love of humanity, love of creation, but in an unselfish way, as a means to refine oneself, to be a giver. That is the longer path, but we can combine both. Okay?
Yeah. So beautiful. Another question is how to distinguish between intuitive knowledge and imagination.
Oh, that's a wonderful question about intuitive knowledge and imagination. But let me just complete that divine love part first. Something is left. Because whatever we think of, there are aspects of love. Because normally nowadays we think bhakti, jumping, dancing, and, doing dhol majira and bhajan. Please, that nothing to do with love. Very often it's a show. I've seen people dancing in, all these places, which is as good or as bad as a club dance. With all the nice dress and perfume. That's not bhakti. So bhakti is that self-giving. And how does it manifest? Constant manan, thinking of the divine, reading about the divine, thinking about the attributes of the divine. That's why we have Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad describing. So when we constantly meditate upon the qualities of the divine, attributes of the divine, think of the divine, serve the divine, then automatically our love becomes manifold and we get molded. So this was one part regarding bhakti. So bhakti is not about jumping, dancing. It's very quiet. It's a deep sense. It has nothing to do with, for the sake of divine, I am going to, kill people. It's nothing to do with bhakti. True bhakti is deep within, where the soul gives itself to the divine unreservedly, unconditionally. And it's very rare. Where we find it, we must do pranam to it, because it's very powerful. So now we come to this intuitive knowledge and imagination. Now, first is, imagination is a power of formation. How do we imagine? We sit down and I say, okay, let me imagine something. So I start imagining. And very often there will be desire, self, my fantasy part. All this will come mixed, and this is a conscious, deliberate process. And what is intuition? When the mind is quiet, pop, suddenly like light. There is a flash. You didn't really, wanted that. And it comes. At the most, what we were doing for intuition, we concentrate on an idea. Anything we want to know. We don't start, running the mind towards it. Supposing you want to know about a person, the worst thing to do, by the way, because it's a world of horror. But supposing you want to know, HRs. So, imagination is, oh, he looks smart. He must be good. Then there is, likes, dislikes. Everything is playing upon. There are people who start doing this process, but they are completely misled and deceived. Whereas just stay quiet. Don't try to judge. Don't do anything. Just stay quiet. Let the person's face, the body, the being, don't judge anything by anything one has heard. After a while, you will just pass through the consciousness and identify it. So imagination requires a different process. Here the mind is forming images. That's how the term imagination comes. Very often images which are satisfying the desired self within us. That's what is daydreaming and fantasizing. Whereas intuition is where, by the power of concentration and stillness, because of the concentration, the mind becomes still, and at a point it passes beyond the object into the subject. That's how it knows, and that's how anything can be known. So, intuition comes when the mind is quiet. Imagination is when the mind is active, it is creating images. Imagination is pushed by the desired self, and intuition is something which comes from above. Imagination may give us, feelings of horror or joy or thrill or pleasure depending on what we are imagining. Intuition brings always the sense of joy, like a creative ananda. It is because it's a higher light. The moment it enters, it creates an aha feeling, like Archimedes. Eureka! That feeling comes because it's something which is descending from above. And finally, intuitive knowledge carries its own certitude. It is going to be. Now, this certitude part, one has to test and retest. So, initially, as a scientist, when intuition begins to awaken in a human being, it gets mixed with rational mind, could be, could not be, and we don't study it as a scientist should. Whereas actually, if we really begin to, when the intuition becomes active, then we begin to see over a space of time that whether this is leading me in that direction or not. Then we begin to perfect this faculty like any other faculty. It's a faculty which is awakening and we need to perfect it. Like inspiration. We begin to become aware that if we are in a certain state, inspiration works very well. In another state, there is a block. It just doesn't come. With revelation, with visions, intuitions, they are all higher faculties. And they require a certain degree of quietening of the mind. They will not awaken in a consciousness which is restless. So many people who are imaginative, their mind is constantly running and throwing up images. So this is how one has to distinguish. And then over a period of time, one gathers experience, one knows that, this intuition turned out to be true. And that's how one learns the process.
The questions are never ending, Bhaiya. But there is one last question I would take. Okay, and that question has been sent to me on WhatsApp. So, sure. So a teacher, Neetu ma'am, she wants to ask that, is being emotional a sign of strength or weakness? Please ask.
Is being emotional a sign of strength or weakness? This will apply to everything. Is being intellectual a sign of strength or weakness? Is having a strong willpower, let me put it paradoxically, having strength, is it sign of strength or weakness? So it depends upon how we use it. What being emotional means, there is an excess of emotional energy. That's all. Now, if we channelize it towards its, we are given this much money. It's like having a wealth. Now, it may be a weakness if the wealth rides over me. And it becomes a strength if I am its master. So, being emotional means that we have either tremendous emotional energy or very small patram, vessel. So, widen the vessel, hold this energy, direct it rightly, turn it towards its true purposes and its strength. Let emotion ride over us, then drown in, then, it's of course a weakness. Not weakness is not the right word, but any energy of nature. Intellect, again the same thing. If we think intellect is the path which will give us knowledge, at some point it will only lead to cultivation of arrogance, which is just the opposite of knowledge. But use the intellect rightly, because it's an intelligence given to man. Don't let it ride over us, but be its master by something greater than intelligence. As the mother says, either the psychic being or something still greater. And then we can use it to create, to organize, to express what has been found. As mother puts it very beautifully, intellect is not the instrument of knowledge. It can give form to knowledge. Knowledge comes from above. Similarly, emotions. Emotions are wonderful if one has it. Much better than not having it. But it's a wealth. Use it rightly, turn it inwards, learn to make the vessel wider by unselfishness so that it can pour more and more, and then emotions are the direct road to the divine. Same with power. Let power get into the head, and then, as the great poet has said, Kanak kanakte sauguni madakta adhikaye, ya khaye boraye hai, wo paaye boraye. So, if it gets into our head, means basically it is the ego which, when uses the capacities given to us, it becomes a weakness and path to ruin. Whereas the more we step out the ego and place whatever we have at the service of world at least, and finally at the service of the divine, then it becomes something very strong and powerful. So it depends on how we use it, whether we are its master or we are its slave. Okay.
So आपके लिए एक मैसेज है जो लिखते हैं कि नमस्ते भैया, तारा दी भी सुन रही हैं और आपको धन्यवाद कह रही हैं, और हम सबके फीलिंग को अपर्णा दी ने बहुत ब्यूटीफुली किया है कि मेरे लिए ये ज्ञानवर्धक अनुभव है हमेशा की तरह. तो ज्ञान का तो कह नहीं सकता, बट अनुभव बहुत अनुपम है. एंड विद दैट आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट बेनू दी टू से अ फ्यू वर्ड्स.
सबसे पहले बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, और मुझे सुनकर बहुत ही अच्छा लगा कि तारा दी ने भी सुना, और उनको ज़रूरत नहीं है किसी चीज़ की, बट थैंक यू सो मच. ये तो परिवार है हम सबका. हाँ, बेनू दी, थैंक यू सो मच.